The thing about academic conferences was that nobody ever expected blood. Kor stood at the podium in the Interstellar Academy's central amphitheater, watching 300 of the galaxy's finest minds stare at him like he'd just announced gravity was optional. His projection screen displayed a single list. 20 species ranked by composite endurance metrics, and somewhere around line 7, the room had stopped being polite. "You cannot be serious." That was Professor Thelm. A Crevoshenwo species had survived ice ages that would have glassed most planets. Charisse from her seat, all four arms gesturing at the screen. Humans 7th, above the Drachner sovereignty, whose soldiers can function for weeks without sleep. Above my own people, who endured 10,000 years of atmospheric collapse. Kororith had prepared for this. He tapped his data pad, and the screen shifted to show his methodology. A matrix of weighted variables spanning pain tolerance, environmental adaptability, psychological resilience, regenerative capacity, and motivational persistence under duress. Clean, empirical, it's impossible to argue with unless you wanted to dispute mathematics itself. The drawer sovereignty ranks 9th, Korth said evenly. Your people rank 12th. The metrics don't measure how long you survived your extinction events. They measure how much punishment an average member of your species can absorb and continue functioning. Humans score exceptionally high across multiple categories simultaneously. They live 80 orbits. Thelen's voice dripped contempt. Most of them die from their own internal organs failing. They're fragile. They run marathons on broken legs. Korth pulled up a file. Medical imagery of a human female crossing a finish line with a fractured tibia. The bone visible through compromised tissue. The academic presentation begins. This one finished the race. Walked to the medical tent herself. Refused transportation, the room murmured. A culinary scholar in the back made a note. Anecdotal, someone called out. Statistical, Korth corrected. He changed this display again. Graphs, now distribution curves. Thousands of data points pulled from human medical databases, military records, disaster response footage. Humans have documented SIS of individuals continuing complex cognitive tasks after sustaining. Damagethit would incapacitate most species. They perform surgery on themselves in survival scenarios. They've amputate their own trapped limbs to escape. Their pain threshold means nothing if they die from infection 2 days later. Interrupted a Veltraxian trade minister. Endurance they're a death world species pretending to be robust. Koreth felt his secondary mandibles. Twitch of Veltraxian stress till he thought he'd trained out of himself. They are a death world species. That is point. They evolved in an environment hostile enough that their baseline resilience exceeds what most Ofus consider extraordinary. And unlike species that specialized, he glanced at Thelem. They generalized. They're not the best at any single metric. They're disturbingly competent at all of them. A Henvari philosopher raised one delicate hand. Define motivational persistence under duress. Finally, someone asking the right question. The capacity to continue pursuing an objective despite escalating cost to self, Korth said, physical, psychological, social. Most species have a breaking point where self-preservation is goal-oriented behavior. Humans have that point too. It's just a paused, choosing his words carefully. Significantly further out than the galactic average, and in some cases, it doesn't seem to exist at all. That's not endurance, the Henvari said softly. That's pathology. I didn't label the behavior. I measured it. Thelen wasn't done. Show us your number 1 then. If humans are 7th, what diluted species did you put above them? The room leaned forward. Kor had known this was coming. He'd debated leaving it out of the presentation entirely. But academic integrity was academic integrity. He looked at his datapad. His thumb hovered over the file. The issue with the top 6, he said slowly, is that they're not full species classifications. They're subsets, Athesian professor. Scales gleaming under the amphitheater lights. You ranked age groups, genetic variations, behavioral and biological subsets within existing species. Kor pulled up a secondary chart. Soldiers, mystics, genetic outliers. Individuals operating under specific neuroculic conditions. The rankings become difficult to parse because we're comparing specialized populations. Defends his methodologies, general ones. And your number one? Thielen pressed. Core looked at the file name on his datapad. He'd titled it clinically the way a proper xenobiologist should. But even the clinical language felt insufficient now that he'd compiled the data. He'd spent 6 months verifying it, cross-referencing with field researchers, interviewing human medical personnel who'd thought his questions were strange, but had answered anyway. The file name read, Human Maternal Subset Phenyl. I haven't published that section yet, Core said. The room erupted. Accusations off. Incomplete research. Academic cowardice. Conspiracy theories about human bribes. Korath stood there and let them shout. He'd expected this too. Eventually, the noise coalesced into a single demand, echoed by dozens of voices. Show us. Prove it. Justify your methodology or retract the paper. Cored his eyes. Took a breath, opened the file. The number one ranked subset. He said, voice cutting through the din, as human feels operating under maternal behavioral conditions. Silence, then laughter, scattered at first, then rolling through the amphitheater like a wave. Even Thielen was smirking now, shaking her head. You ranked mothers? Someone wheezed. You put mothers at the top of a galactocenderance index? Yes, Korth said. Mothers, Thielen repeated as if the word itself was the punchline. Caregivers, individuals, bioclic compromised by pregnancy, hormonally altered, physically depleted by offspring production. That's your Apex endurance category. Yes, Korth said again. The lauder contended. He let it. He'd earned his doctorate in xenobiology by being meticulous, by following data into uncomfortable places, by refusing to let cultural assumptions override empirical evidence. And the data on this was very, very clear. The laughter died slowly when he didn't join in, when he just stood there waiting. You're serious, Thion, Professor said. Pull the file yourself if you don't believe me, Core replied. It's all documented. Injury tolerance, environmental survival rates, psychological breaking points, recovery metrics. The subset scores are hepaused, anomalous, even for humans, Corlin said, and her voice had lost its mockery. If you're fabricating data to make a philosophical point about caregiving instincts, I'm not fabricating anything. He met her eyes. I'm telling you that when you isolate human females operating in defense of offspring, their endurance metrics break the model, not by a small margin, by an order of magnitude. And I don't know why. The room had gone very quiet now. That's not possible, someone whispered. Core looked at the screen at the singling of text that had taken him months to feel comfortable typing. Human maternal rank 1. I thought so too, he said. But the controversial ranking Revioletta data doesn't care what we think is possible. Professor Vallen's office smelled like preserved moss and old star charts. Comforting in the way libraries were comforting to species who lived long enough to forget most of what they'd learned. Korth sat across from the Quillery scholar, watching her ancient eyes track through Hyson-published data on a translucent tablet. You've stepped in some things unfortunate, Villain said finally. Scientific accuracy, politics dressed as biology. She set the tablet down. How much field observation did you conduct? 18 months embedded with human populations across 4 colonies and their homeworld. Medical facilities, disaster sites, agricultural settlements, military installations. Korth gestured at the tablet. The maternal metrics weren't even my focus initially. I was tracking general stress response patterns. But the outliers kept clustering around one demographic. Vallen's head tendrils curled. Amusement or concern, Core could never tell. Let me guess. You thought it was measurement error? For the first 3 months, yes. Korth pulled up a specific file on his own device. Then I witnessed a structural collapse at a mining settlement. Tunnel cave-in, a human woman. Construction supervisor, 2 offspring, aged 6 and local years. Was buried under approximately 800 kilograms of rubble. Rescue teams estimated she'd been trapped for 40 minutes before they reached her. and Shed moved the rubble herself. Dislocated both shoulders doing it, fractured her sternum. Then she carried both children 3 kilometers to the medical station before her adrenaline crashed, and she collapsed. Cora looked up. The physician who treated her said the shoulder damage alone should have made arm function possible. He couldn't explain how she'd maintained motor control long enough to walk that distance. Villain was quiet for a moment. Adrenaline is well documented. Not at those levels. Not with that degree of injury. Not with sustained, complex decision-making throughout. Core scrolled through more files. I have 63 similar cases. Vehicle accident share. Human mothers lifted machinery to extract trapped children. Machinery that required hydraulic equipment to move forward. Wilderness survival scenarios where they caked through conditions that killed trained soldiers. Medical emergencies where they performed field surgery on their own injuries because the offspring needed care and no one else was present. Self-sacrifice narratives exist in every species with parental investment strategies. Valen said carefully, this isn't sacrifice. Sacrifice implies accepting death. These individuals weren't dying. They were refusing to. Kareth's voice picked up intensity despite himself. There's a case from Earth's historical professor Valen's warning chords, 20th century, before they achieved orbital flight. A human femeline, a vehicle accident, trapped in burning wreckage with her infant. First responders arrived to find she'd torn through the vehicle's safety restraints with her bare hands. Metal and synthetic fibers extracted the child, and walked away with third-degree burns across 40% of her body. She didn't lose consciousness until the child was confirmed safe. Pain shock should have exactly Corleone forward. Pain shock should have incapacitated her within seconds. Blood loss should have followed. Cognitive function should have deteriorated. None of it happened on the timeline it should have. And this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. When offspring survival is the variable, normal human physiological limits become. He searched for the word negotiable. Valen's tendrils had gone very still. You're describing a biological override mechanism. I'm describing observed behavior that I can't model with existing xenobiologic prompts. Korath set his device aside. Every species has parental instincts, but must operate within their standard physical parameters. A Kravosian parent protects their young by being large and durable. A Hinvari parent uses coordinated group defense. Humans do what they've always done. They exceed their own specifications when circumstances require it. And maternal humans do this more than paternal ones. The data suggests yes, though paternal metrics are also elevated above baseline, but maternal subjects show the highest extremes. I don't know if it's hormonal oxytocin, prolactin, the biochemical CALST, associated with pregnancy and nursing, or if it's psychological conditioning, or if there's a genetic component we haven't identified. Korath pulled up a neurological scan. Look at this human female. 12 hours post-labor. No sleep. Significant blood loss. Epidural anesthesia still in her system. Her infant stops breathing. Medical staff are present, responding appropriately, and her brain activity spikes here. He indicated a region in threat assessment centers simultaneous with motor cortex activation. She was physically restrained in the bed for her own safety, and she still attempted to reach the child. Conscious override of medical. Restraint while cognitively impaired and physically depleted. That's irrational. That's the point. Rationality? Becca Mesocondry? The objective offspring survival overrides cost-benefit analytically. Korath closed the scan. I have neurological data, hormonal panels, comparative muscle fiber analysis, pain receptor studies. All OFIT points to the same conclusion. Something changes when this subset perceives a threat to their offspring, and whatever changes makes them the most dangerous thing in the room. Valan was silent for a long time. Outside her office window, the Academy's garden stretched toward the horizon, carefully maintained by species who'd learned to cooperate across genetic gulfs. Peaceful, orderly. If you publish this, she said finally, other species will recalibrate their threat assessments of humans. The data is accurate. I'm not questioning your methodology. I'm questioning your survival instinct. Valen fixed him with a look that carried 3 centuries of academic politics behind it. You're about to tell the galaxy that humans have a biological weapon they don't even know how to control. A subset of their population that becomes physically exceptional under specific triggers. Do you understand what that implies for trade? The maternal subset data, explained negotiations, military treaties, immigration policy? I understand Thatchiance requires honest reporting regardless of political convenience. Honest reporting can get speciescrinted. Corey, dissected. Controlled. Valen's tendrils curled inward, a protective gesture. Humans are already watched carefully because of their death world origins. You're about to tell everyone they're more formidable than previously calculated. They deserve to know what they're dealing with. Who deserves to know? The humans who might not appreciate being classified as biological hazards, or everyone else who might decide prevention is smarter than coexistence? Karoth stood, gathering his devices. I'm not a politician. I'm a xenobiologist. The data goes into the archive because that's how knowledge works. What others do with it isn't my responsibility. Then you're naive. Valen's voice was sharp. Now, knowledge and survival aren't always compatible. Sometimes discretion is the more evolved choice. And sometimes, Korath said, heading for the door, discretion is just cowardice with better vocabulary. He submitted the full paper, including this maternal subset analysis, to the Interstellar Archive Network at 00300 station time. By Zoro 600, it had propagated to every major Academist institution in the known galaxy. By Oro 900, his message queue had 11,000 unread notifications. By noon, 3 separate governments had requested his raw data for independent Vifaniashik. Korth sat in his quarters, watching the numbers climb, and wondered if Valen had been right about survival instincts. After all, the thing nobody told you about starting a galactic controversy was how boring the first 72 hours were. Kor had expected immediate chaos, emergency council sessions, diplomatic incidents, perhaps a strongly worded retraction demand from Earth's government. Instead, he got academic peer reviews, hundreds of them, methodological critiques, requests for supplementary datasets, polite inquiries about his statistical store. The galaxy's response to potentially explosive information was apparently to check his citations first. Then the pattern shifted. A security analyst named Threx, stationed on Outpost Kepler 186, published an incident report that had been sitting in bureaucratic limbo for 8 months. A human cargo worker, female, 1 dependent child, enrolled in the station's education facility, had been on shift when a loading bay suffered explosive decompression. Standard protocol was immediate evacuation to sealed sections. The worker's daughter had been in an observation corridor on the wrong Sadeaf the Briage. Threx's report noted with the dry precision of someone who still didn't quite believe their own documentation that the worker had manually sealed the primary hull breach using emergency plating and a welding torch. No protective suit. Exposure to vacuum for approximately 90 seconds. Third-degree burns across both arms. Burst blood vessels in her eyes. She'd maintained consciousness long enough to verify her daughter's safety through the viewport, then collapsed. The medical reportage to Threx's file showed tissue damage, consistent with someone who should have been dead. The worker had been released from medical care after 6 days. Threx's commentary added as an footnote. Previous assessment of human fragility may require recalibration. That report went viral in military circles within hours. Then came the trade station footage. Someone leaked surveillance recordings carefully edited to remove identifying information. Though Kor suspected that was more about avoiding litigation than protecting privacy, a human logistics coordinator, visibly pregnant, had continued managing crisis response. During a reactor containment failure, while every other species on Thess station was evacuating, the footage showed her directing traffic, rerouting power systems. In publication and immediate reactions, physically hauling injured personnel toward escape pods. She'd been the last stone off the station. The timestamp showed she'd gone into labor for hours later. Healthy delivery. No complications. The comment section beneath that video was a dissertation in itself. Species comparing notes, asking questions, sharing their own observations that suddenly seemed relevant instead of merely anecdotal. A Dror military strategist published a tactical analysis essay titled Devisiting Human Combat Doctrine, the Guardian Variable. It dissected boarding actions, defensive operations, combat footage where human units hadn't retreated despite overwhelming odds, specifically when civilians were behind them. The essay stopped short of explicit conclusions, but heavily implied that human forces with something to protect are fundamentally different threats than human forces with nothing to lose. That one got classified by 3 different militaries, but copies were already circulating through secular channels. A xenopsychologist named Krell attempted damage control with a counter-theory. Korath had mistaken cultural conditioning for biological imperative. Humans valorized self-sacrifice in their mythology and entertainment media. They were performing learned behavior, not expressing inherent capability. The suicide missions, the impossible rescues, the refusal to abandon others. It was all social programming, not physiological adaptation. Krell's paper was elegant, well-reasoned, supported by examples of human cultural narrative about heroic parents. It lasted 6 hours before another researcher pointed out that Korath's data included subjects from isolated colonies with minimal cultural connection to Earth's dominant mythologies, plus historical records from before humans had developed interstellar communication networks. The behavior predated the cultural explanation by millennia. Krell didn't track the paper, but stopped responding to questions. Meanwhile, human diplomats were baffled. Ambassador Chen, no relation to any Oft Chen's in Korath's dataset, she'd made that very clear, gave an interview to a pan-galactic news service. The host asked her about the endurance ranking. With the sort of delicate phrasing species used when trying not to start incidents, Chen had laughed. Actually laughed. "Look," she'd said, leaning back in the interview chair. "I've got 2 kids, teenagers now, but I remember the early years. You don't sleep. You're running on something that isn't quite coffee innocent, quite willpower. Your body does things you didn't know it could do. Is that some kind of superpower? No, it's just what happens when someone depends on you completely, and there's no one else to do it." She'd shrugged. Every parent in the galaxy probably understands that. Don't mess with Samian's kids. That's not a human thing. That's a universal thing. Except it wasn't universal. That was becoming increasingly clear. A quinary anthropologist compared parental response patterns across species. Most showed increased defensive behavior when offspring were threatened. Some showed impressive bravery. None showed the statistical disregard for self-preservation limits that human maternal subjects demonstrated. The Equil-Nari report was cautious, hesitant to make sweeping claims, but the data visualization was damning. Human maternal responses were 3 standard deviations. It's outside the galactic norm for stress-triggered capability enhancement. 3 standard deviations meant this shouldn't exist in a normal distribution. It meant outlier, anomaly, error, or new classification entirely. The Veltraxian diplomatic corps, the galaxy responds to the research, quietly updated their first contact protocols buried. On page 47 of a routine procedural revision was a new subsection. When engaging with human populations, avoid conflict scenarios involving guardians of juvenile humans. Threat assessment becomes unpredictable. De-escalation strategies may prove ineffective. Nobody made an announcement. Nobody issued a memo. But the update propagated through embassy networks, security training programs, trade negotiation, briefings. Species who dealt with humans regularly started noticing patterns. And human delegation compositions started asking different questions during personnel assessments. Started paying attention to who had dependents and who didn't, because apparently that mattered now. Korath watched it all unfold from his quarters, tracking mentions of his paper across networks. Monitoring the conversation he'd started, Valen had been partially right. There were definitely political implications, but she'd been wrong about one thing. Humans weren't being treated as hazards. They were being treated with caution, respect, the kind of careful courtesy you extended towards something you'd underestimated and wouldn't make that mistake with again. A message came through on his personal channel. Sender Diplomatic Conference Committee Nexus Station. Subject, Invitation to Present Research. Korath opened it, read it twice. The conference was in 6 months. Neutral territory, multiple species representation. The invitation specifically requested he present his maternal subset findings and be available for Q&A sessions with attending diplomats. Human delegates will be present. He accepted before he could think about whether that was wise. The comments section under his paper's public posting had reached 2 million entries when he finally stopped checking. Somewhere in that sprawling, multilinging, multi-aces argument about biology and culture and the nature of protective instincts, someone had posted a simple observation. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. It's not, are humans dangerous? It's what makes them dangerous. And Thean's words apparently threaten what they care about. So maybe just don't do that. 16,000 species had upvoted the comment. Korath closed his device and stared at the ceiling of his quarters. He'd wanted to contribute to xenobiological understanding. He'd wanted his research to matter. He'd succeeded. Whether that was a good thing remained to be seen. Nexus Station was designed for neutrality. Bland architecture, ambient temperature, set to the galactic average, lighting that offended no one's photoreceptors. It was the sort of place where wars ended and treaties began, where species learned to tolerate each other's breathing patterns across negotiation tables. Kor had expected the science presentation to be the difficult part. He'd been wrong. The panel discussion had gone fine. He'd presented his findings to a room full of diplomats who asked surprisingly intelligent questions and took extensive notes. No one had challenged his data. No one had accused him of fabrication or bias. If anything, they'd been too accepting, nodding alongus if he'd merely confirmed what they'd suspected all along. The mining rights negotiation was something else entirely. It wasn't his negotiation. Korath wasn't present because 3 human delegates had requested his attendance as a scientific consultant, which apparently meant sitting in the back and watching species argue about asteroid composition and extraction permits. 2 of the human delegates were career diplomats. The third was an infrastructure specialist named Ken Drosy, brought in for her expertise on deep space mining operations. Korath had learned from the pre-conference briefing materials that OSI had 2 children, ages 11 and 14. It hadn't seemed relevant at the time. The Scythian Collective was attempting to claim exclusive extraction rights to a military and diplomatic implications Minorque belt near human colonial space. Their lead negotiator, a by named Vosk, had opened with aggressive posturing, reminders of Scythian military superiority, veiled implications about what happened to species who interfered with collective interests. The usual territorial dominance display. Standard negotiation theater's supposed toast-to-blish hierarchy before actual discussions began. The human diplomats had responded with polite deflection. Economic counterproposals, the procedural dance everyone expected. Then Vosk had made a mistake. He'd leaned across the table toward Oz, deliberately invading her space, and suggested that perhaps the humans should reconsider their positioning before circumstance become uncomfortable. Physical intimidation? Crude, but sometimes effective with species who had strong personal space requirements. Oe had smiled. Uncomfortable? She'd repeated, voice pleasant. That's an interesting word choice. She'd set her datapad down, folded her hands on the table. I gave birth to my first child during a power outage in a colony habitat where the backup generators failed. 43 hours of labor, no epidural bez. The medical systems were offline. The attending physician was guiding my partner through the delivery via audio communication because she was trapped in another section. Pause. My second child arrived 12 minutes after my water broke in the back of a transport shuttle, because sometimes biology doesn't wait for convenient timing. I've had kidney stones, appendicitis that ruptured before I could reach surgery. 3 broken ribs from a maintenance accident that I worked through for 6 days. Because we were understaffed and the rotation didn't allow for medical leave, the room had gone very quiet. So when you use the word uncomfortable, Oe continued, still smiling, I need you to understand that my reference point might be calibrated differently, Thanyers. If you'd like to establish a negotiating position through physical intimidation, I'm happy to discuss pain tolerance metrics. We can compare recovery times from significant injuries. We can review stress response data. Or she picked up her datapad. We could skip the territorial posturing and discus mineral rights like professionals. Vasquez had pulled back from the table. The negotiation had shifted after that, not dramatically. No one had capitulated, grand concessions. But the tone had changed. The Scythian delegation stopped treating the humans as something to be managed and started treating them as something to be negotiated with. Carefully, the final agreement gave Humansco extraction rights with environmental oversight provisions. Fair terms, equitable, kind of outcome you've got when both sides respected each other's capacity to make life difficult. Afterward, Korth found himself in the station's observation deck, staring at the streaked starlight through the viewport. He'd come up here to process what he'd witnessed, to make notes for a potential follow-up paper about behavioral applications of endurance metrics in diplomatic contexts. Bit dramatic, wasn't I? He turned. Oe stood a few meters away, holding a beverage container, looking slightly embarrassed. Effective, Korth said. Vosk's species responds to strength demonstrations. I've read the cultural briefings. She moved closer, leaning against the viewport railing. Though using my medical history as a negotiating tactic wasn't exactly in the diplomatic handbook. I'll probably get a stern message from the office about professionalism. Will you care? She laughed. Not particularly. The contract's solid. The Nexus Station negotiation. That's what matters. She glanced at him. You're the one who started all this, aren't you? Thin durance paper. I documented observed patterns. I didn't start anything, right? You just told everyone that human moms are galactic-level terrifying. She sipped her drink. My kids think it's hilarious. My daughter printed out your ranking chart and put it on the refrigerator. She keeps telling her friends her mom's won on the alien danger scale. Korth's mandibles twitched. Amusement this time. Definitely amusement. How do you feel about the classification? Honestly, it's weird. I'm an infrastructure engineer. I design water reclamation systems. I'm not intimidating. She paused. Though I did once work a 72-hour shift during a habitat emergency because my kids were in the evac shelter. I wasn't leaving until I confirmed the life support was stable. So maybe there's something to your data. The data suggests you operate outside normal parameters when offspring safety is a variable. The data OS said Drail. Lie suggests I'm a parent, which, yeah, that's pretty much job description. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Korth noticed with the detached observation of someone trained to catalog behavioral patterns that Os had positioned herself between him and the observation deck entrance. Not aggressively, not obviously, just there occupying space in a way that controlled access to the room. Territorial instinct, probably unconscious. He shifted his position slightly, moving toward the viewport's far end, testing the observation. Ozzy didn't follow, didn't move at all, just remained where she was, casual and relaxed. Maintaining that same position between him and the exit. She probably didn't even realize she was doing it. Can I ask you something? Corsade professional curiosity. Sure, if there had been an actual threat in that negotiation, physical danger, not just posturing, would you have? He searched for diplomatic phrasing. How would you have responded? Oy was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. My kids are back on the colony, safe, staying with their grandparents while I'm off station. She turned to face him so honestly. It's probably with reasonable professionalism and appropriate conflict. De-escalation techniques. Pause. But if my kids had been here on this station, another pause longer this time, then I guess we'd both find out if your data was accurate. The way she said it, calm, matter-of-fact, with no bravado or threat in her voice, was somehow more unsettling than any aggressive declaration would have been. Your paper's not wrong, O said. You just measured something everyone already knew, but hadn't bothered to quantify. Parents protect their kids. That's not complicated. It's just, she gestured vaguely. What you do? Universe expects you to, so you figure it out. Biology helps, probably. adrenaline, hormones, whatever. But mostly, it's just the decision that failing isn't an option, so you don't fail. Most species have biological elements that prevent that level of override. Then most species, OE said, didn't evolve on Earth, which is probably lucky for them. Korath watched her finish her drink, toss the container into the recycling port, and head toward the exit with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned their ability to handle whatever came next. She paused at the doorway. Thanks, by the way, for the paper. It's nice being taken seriously. The observation deck conversation, she grinned. Even if the reason is slightly terrifying, then she was gone, and Kor was alone with the starlight and his thoughts. He'd spent 2 years researching endurance, measuring it, quantifying it, ranking it across species and populations. He'd built a comprehensive model of biological resilience and psychological atonement. He'd identified the outliers, documented the anomalies, published the findings. But standing here replaying the conversation, he realized his model had a fundamental flaw. Endurance wasn't a static trait. It wasn't something you possessed in measurable quantities like bone density or neural processing speed. It was a threshold that shifted based on what you were enduring for. Most species had that threshold, but it was fixed, built into their biology, immovable. Humans had it too. They just didn't accept it as fixed. And the subset that ranked number 1, they didn't have a threshold at all. Or if they did, it was so far beyond normal parameters that it might as well not exist. The trigger wasn't injury or pain or exhaustion. The trigger was threat to offspring. And once triggered, the system apparently didn't have an off switch. Just kept running until the threat was resolved or the body gave out completely, which made them what? Dangerous, unpredictable, formidable. Yes, all of that. But also exactly what O had said. Parents doing what parents did. The universe expected it, so they delivered. The rest of the galaxy just hadn't been paying attention. Korath pulled out his datapad and made a note for his next paper. Endurance metrics, maybe less predictive than previously theorized. Recommend shifting focus from capability assessment to motivation analysis. Capability appears to be negotiable when sufficient motivation is present. Human subjects particularly. Maternal subset demonstrate this principle most clearly. Further research required into what other species are capable of when circumstance demands it. He looked out at the stars one more time, then headed back to his quarters. Tomorrow, there would be more panels, more negotiations, more opportunities to watch species recalibrate their understanding of each other. His paper had shifted things. Not catastrophically, not violently, just enough that people paid attention differently now. And in the end, wasn't that what good science was supposed to do? Make you look at the universe and see something you'd missed before, something that was always there. Just waiting for someone to measure it properly, even if what you measured was the distance between impossible and necessary, especially.